and we are going to take on item D4, which is the Truth Act Community Forum. And we're going to first turn to Timothy Ewell, our Chief Assistant County Administrator, who's going to give us some introductory remarks. That will be followed by the Asian Law Caucus, and Melanie Kim, one of their staff attorneys, will be making 10 minutes of comments. And then we'll be going into the Sherit's presentation, which is the essential part of the Truth Act Forum. It's an opportunity we're given each year to hear from any of our county departments, particularly law enforcement, that has any interaction with ICE. And so, Tim, if you could lead us off, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items. We have added 2 items onto the Agenda Quick system to bring those up with the public. We have received 7 written public comments that were accepted after publishing of the agenda through yesterday at noon. And we've also received a Spanish translation version of the community's presentation. At this time, we'd like your board to vote to accept those into the record.
Okay, and I would entertain a motion to accept those and report. Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Glover, a second by Supervisor Burgess. If we could please have a roll call vote.
District 1?
Yes.
District 3?
Yes.
District 4?
Yes.
Yes.
District 5?
Yes.
District 2?
Yes. That motion passes unanimously, so those additional items will be made part of the record of this action. Okay, Tim, please go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And before we get started with our staff report today, I do want to just acknowledge the work of our CCTV staff as well as information technology, Jamie Napier, our Chief Assistant Clerk of the Board, as well as our interpreter service. We are again this year providing simultaneous interpretation of these proceedings in Spanish. Those can be accessed through a link that is listed on the county website. We have a news flash up for the Truth Act that is kind of a central point of information right now for folks to participate in today's forum. Participating by television, we this year, different from last year, are able to stream our television proceedings in Spanish. You click SAP to change the audio real-time in Spanish on your television. We're also using a closed caption service to provide real-time Spanish closed captions. So that's a really exciting addition that we're providing this year. In terms of our web streaming, we are obviously streaming our proceedings in English on Agenda Quick through the county website. On the county website, we also have a link to a real-time webcast that's live right now on YouTube in Spanish. So those are things that these staff members have been working very hard on the last couple of months, and I did want to acknowledge their work. We are also having a virtual...
Tim, I was just going to say, would you please also acknowledge that we did offer language translation services in other languages as well, and we gave people last week a deadline to let us know, and we did not receive any requests for additional languages, although we did make that available.
Yes, Madam Chair, that is correct, and I do want to kind of get into some of the other items that we did make available. Number one, we did provide a period for written public comment submissions. As of the date of publishing the agenda, we had not received any written public comments. Subsequent to that, as I mentioned in my request for your vote to accept materials, we received 7 additional written public comments that have been uploaded to Agenda Quick. That was through yesterday at noon. And subsequent to that, we've received 13 between yesterday at noon and now. Those public comments specifically will be included in your minutes. In addition, Supervisor, what you were referencing, we did make available consecutive interpretation of public comment in other languages upon request to the Clerk of the Board. Those requests were due July 20th to facilitate obtaining an interpreter who can assist with that. We also extended that to July 22nd. We had not received any requests from the public for additional languages. We also checked yesterday, and there were no requests through yesterday. So with that, I'd like to just get into our staff report. We do have, as you mentioned, Chair Anderson, Sheriff Livingston present. We also have Melanie Kim, who's a staff attorney with the Asian Law Caucus, to provide a community presentation. Each of those presentations have been translated to Spanish, their PowerPoints, and those have been uploaded on the county's AgendaQuick system and are available to the public. So with that, item D4 on your agenda today requests that the board hold a community forum pursuant to Assembly Bill 2792, also known as the Truth Act. The purpose of the community forum is to provide information to the public regarding the provision of ICE access to individuals by county law enforcement agencies and to receive and consider public comment. ICE is the Federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, which is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Homeland Security. The Truth Act specifically defines ICE access as for purposes of civil immigration enforcement only, to include when an individual is stopped with or without their consent, arrested, detained, or otherwise under the control of local law enforcement agency, all of the following 5 actions: responding to an ICE hold, notification, or transfer request, providing notification to ICE in advance of the public that an individual is being or will be released at a certain date and time through data sharing or otherwise, providing ICE with non-publicly available information regarding release dates, home addresses, or work addresses, whether through computer databases, jail logs, or otherwise, allowing ICE to interview an individual, or the 5th, providing ICE information regarding dates and times of probation or parole check-ins. This year, to determine whether or not the community forum was necessary, the county administrator requested each county department head to certify whether or not their department was considered a local law enforcement agency for the purposes of the Truth Act, and if yes, whether that department had provided ICE access to individuals as previously discussed. Based on those certifications, it was determined that a community forum would be required for this year based on activities during calendar year 2019, and that the Sheriff's Office would be requested to attend today's forum in front of the board to provide information regarding the nature of the access provided to ICE. It's important to note that the necessity of the county to hold today's forum pursuant to the Truth Act is not a punitive measure. Rather, it's a transparency initiative in statute designed to ensure notification to the public of the extent and the nature of communications between the federal government and local law enforcement agencies in very specific circumstances. With that, Madam Chair, the board is being asked to hold the forum, receive presentations outlined in your board order from the Sheriff's Office and from the Asian Law Caucus on behalf of the community, and to accept and consider public comment for the record. There's no action items before the board today. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And as you mentioned before, our first presentation scheduled is with Ms. Melanie Kim of the Asian Law Caucus. Thank you.
Okay, and the first turn to board members. Does anyone have any questions about the forum? Okay, if we could go ahead then and go to Ms. Kim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Kim. I'm a staff attorney with Asian Law Caucus. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen. Okay, thank you for having me. Like I said, my name is Melanie Kim. I'm a staff attorney with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Asian Law Caucus. Asian Law Caucus is a member of Contra Costa Immigrant Rights Alliance, also known as CCIRA. CCIRA was established in 2017 after a community member, Chris Kim, was funneled into ICE custody after showing up at the county's probation department. This collaboration between the county and ICE was alarming and resulted in a coalition of organizations coming together and forming CCIRA. Since then, we started a rapid response system to respond to increasing immigration enforcement. I'm going to talk about key California immigrant rights laws. These laws seek to disentangle local law enforcement from ICE and to stop local law enforcement from doing ICE's work for them. When counties work with ICE, they appear to be the same entity as ICE. Counties spend local resources on helping ICE funnel people into ICE detention for deportation, when those resources should be invested in the community programs and services. And it opens up counties to liability. California counties and cities have had to pay out significant dollar amounts in damages for violating California's sanctuary laws. So some background. The main ways local law enforcement agencies collaborate with ICE are through notifications and transfers. Notifications occur when local law enforcement lets ICE know when someone is being released from jail so that ICE can pick them up. Transfers happen when local resources are used to facilitate a transfer from local to ICE custody. And the Truth Act sought to increase transparency around these practices. SB 54, also known as the California Values Act, became effective law in January 2018, and it limits state and local resources from being used to carry out immigration detentions and deportations. The Values Act prohibits many activities that local law enforcement entities have used to work with ICE. Notably, it restricts their ability to notify ICE of release dates. The exceptions to when local law enforcement is allowed to notify ICE of a person's release date are complicated, and choosing to notify ICE opens up a county to liability. And this is why we advocate for a clean policy where there is no collaboration with ICE. And San Francisco and Santa Clara counties have policies like that. The list of prohibited or limited activities continues on this slide. And before I jump into our concerns and demands for this year's forum, I'd like to share a couple of things that have happened since the last forum. So after last year's forum, Sheriff Livingston stated that the county has ended ICE transfers. This is a step in the right direction. Secondly, the Supreme Court denied the Trump administration's lawsuit against California for passing the Values Act. So this means that local law enforcement, like the Sheriff's Office, they're never obligated to work with ICE, and any collaboration with ICE is purely voluntary. So now I'm going to jump in to our concerns for this year. So after last year's forum, CCIRA met with 3 staff members from the Sheriff's Office on 2 occasions. CCIRA provided recommended changes to the Sheriff's policy on how his office interacts with immigrant community members and ICE. However, we never received confirmation that these changes were adopted, nor did we receive an updated written policy on his commitment to end ICE transfers. The Sheriff's Office canceled our 3rd meeting because one of the staff who had attended the previous 2 meetings had retired. We asked if we could meet with the 2 other staff members, but the Sheriff's Office refused this request. And now, because of the pandemic, we are more concerned about the Sheriff collaborating with ICE, now more than ever. Being detained by ICE could be a death sentence in this global COVID-19 pandemic. Even before the pandemic, ICE had a deplorable record when it came to caring for people in their custody. And all of these horrible conditions are exacerbated by COVID-19. When I was making this presentation, 1 in 4 people detained by ICE have tested positive for COVID-19. This number is likely higher than reported because they're not doing mass testing. ICE is also a global super spreader of COVID-19 because of its detention and deportation practices. ICE has also used deceptive tricks to clear COVID-19 positive people for deportation to other countries, including cranking up the air conditioning in a facility to quote unquote hide fevers. ICE is, of course, also the same entity that puts children and families who seek refuge in the United States in cages. So any collaboration with ICE, an entity that has no value for human life, is unacceptable, especially now because of the pandemic. So how is the sheriff currently collaborating with ICE? He continues to publish release dates of people eligible for release from county jail online. And for clarification, when I say eligible for release, that means that the person has completed their sentence or they've paid bail so that the county no longer has any legal authority to hold them any longer. He also proactively notifies ICE of people's release dates so that ICE can show up at the jail when someone is being released and transport them to ICE. During a time when a pandemic is raging through ICE facilities and ICE has proven to be a pandemic super spreader, any practice that increases the likelihood of a community member entering ICE custody is both alarming and inhumane. So for context, this is what the sheriff's release date report looks like. It's published online for anyone to access. It gives ICE all the information it needs to pick up our immigrant community members who are eligible for release. And again, eligible for release means that they've completed their jail sentence or they've paid bail so that the county can no longer legally hold them. Both re-entry and immigrant rights groups have asked the Sheriff's Office to end this practice. At a meeting with CCIRA, the Sheriff's Office stated that they are in the process of implementing a new online system where the user would input personal information of someone to populate the release date. But we were told that the launch of this new system could take 2 years. So CCIRA proposed an interim solution, which is to email release dates to the reentry organizations who want this information until the new system is in place. But the sheriff has not adopted this interim solution. So CCIRA, okay. The Sheriff's Office notices ICE of release dates for people carved out of SB 54. SB 54 is the minimum standard, and the sheriff is not legally obligated to continue the practice of notifying ICE. We know that folks funneled into the criminal legal system are valued members of our communities. When they're picked up by ICE, that means someone's parent, caregiver, sibling, or loved one isn't coming home. And this separation may be permanent because of COVID-19 or because of deportation. When anyone is transported to ICE custody, families and communities are torn apart, and immigrants who are eligible for release from jail should be able to return home like everybody else. So our first recommendation is to adopt CCIRA's recommendations to the sheriff's immigrant policy and to provide the current version of the sheriff's policy to the community, including the office's updated policy ending ICE transfers. Our second recommendation is to stop all notifications to ICE of release dates through communications with ICE and through publishing release dates online. And this slide has additional rationale for our second recommendation. So posting release dates online, that was a practice that started right after SB 54 went into effect. And this could be construed as using resources to engage in immigration enforcement, which is prohibited by SB 54. It encourages ICE to show up at the jail at the point of release to conduct immigration arrests, like I said, at a time where people are getting sick and ICE is spreading the pandemic all over the world. Now, more than ever, is not a time to be collaborating with ICE in any way. It deters immigrant community members from going to the jail to visit or receive their loved ones. ICE notifications and publishing release dates is voluntary, and that became very clear when the Supreme Court refused to take up Trump's lawsuit. And it also subjects immigrants to double punishment. So like I said, when we're talking about notifications, we're talking about people who are eligible for release from county custody. And so they served their sentence or they paid bail, and they're doubly punished when they are transferred to ICE custody, where they are held in deplorable conditions and even deported. So ICE could be a death sentence during the pandemic. These are the questions we have for the Sheriff's Office that we would like answered at today's forum. Will the Sheriff share the version of the Sheriff's policy his office is currently working under? Has the Sheriff issued a written policy reflecting his commitment to end all ICE transfers from the county's jails? How many ICE detainer notification requests did the Sheriff's Office receive in 2019 and also during the pandemic? And how did he respond to those requests in 2019 and during the pandemic? We would also like to know, why does the Sheriff continue to publish release dates online when both immigrant rights and reentry organizations have asked him to stop? Will the Sheriff's Office adopt CCIRA's interim solution of emailing reentry organizations release dates? And does the Sheriff know when the new online platform will require personal information search terms to populate release dates, when that program will launch? And in solidarity with racial justice organizations, CCIRA supports defunding policing and incarceration. In Contra Costa County, that means closing Juvenile Hall and Marsh Creek and making investments in life-affirming services for Black residents. And also, after reviewing the Sheriff's presentation, I have an additional question. Who, under the policy, does the Sheriff do notifications for? And because it's a little unclear whether it's just the carve-outs or if it's more expansive than that. And we advocate for a clean policy with no collaboration for ICE. And that's my presentation. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you so much, Melanie. Are there any board members who have questions for Ms. Kim? Seeing none? Oh, go ahead, Diane, please.
Can you repeat that last question? I was trying to
Sure. So I was just looking at the Sheriff's presentation, and it was unclear to me who exactly they consider eligible for notifications.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
So just some clarification around that would be helpful.
All right.
Great. Thank you so much, and we appreciate you coming today, Melanie. Okay, let's move on to the Sheriff's presentation.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. And Supervisor Anderson, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have a short presentation today. This is in regards to the ICE Access Forum as required by Government Code Section 7283. And IT and Do It is preparing the presentation online. Are they going to maximize that? Let's give it just a moment here.
Okay, can we have Do It go into actually the whole slideshow, please?
Okay, great, thank you. Next slide, please. So what we'd like to accomplish today is to review the Sheriff's Office general policy on immigration status so the community understands what our enforcement posture is. Briefly overview our field operations. As most citizens know, custody is only one portion of our responsibilities in the Office of the Sheriff. So we'll talk about custody, we'll talk about field operations, and I thought it might be helpful for the board and the community to hear an update on COVID-19 as it relates to our custody situation. The next slide, please. Just to be clear, our general policy 10228, no person shall be contacted, detained, or arrested solely on the basis of his or her immigration status, and also the immigration status of a person and the lack of immigration documentation should have no bearing on the manner in which deputies execute their duties. That's official and that's enforceable in our policy. The next slide. Also, immigration detainers, we will not honor immigration detainers in any case. However, immigration requests for notification, the so-called I-247A, is allowed. We will issue those notifications only to the extent that they are in compliance with the Truth Act. And also notifications of anticipated release dates are honored only for those inmates that are held for certain charges, specifically the carve-outs contained in the Penal Code. Next slide, please. By way of background, we have deputies covering the entire county, 750 square miles, with a population of approximately 1.2 million people. The patrol division includes servicing 521 square miles of unincorporated area. We serve an unincorporated population of approximately 175,000 people. Last year, we responded to over 168,000 calls for service. And again, reiterating, field operations does not do any immigration enforcement. Next slide, please. So custody services is really where the focus is for the purposes of this forum. And as the chair mentioned earlier, we do not handle juveniles. That's the responsibility of county probation. We book adults for law enforcement agencies in the county. And it's also important to know that all agencies within the county, whether that arrest is made in Richmond or Antioch or Danville or Pittsburgh, wherever the case may be, they bring that person to Martinez, to our MDF facility for booking and for holding for trial, et cetera. So we book for all agencies in the county. And last year we booked about 24,600 inmates into Martinez detention. Next slide, please. So here are the numbers with regard to our ICE access in 2019. We received a total number of requests from ICE of 495. Pursuant to the restrictions in SB 54, we only made notifications in 129 of those cases, approximately 26%. But it's also important to remember that a number of these notifications were of the same person. So an individual who is here undocumented, subject to ICE interest, may have been arrested on a qualifying offense, requested a notification for release. We gave that notification. For whatever reason, that person was released and ICE did not pursue custody, and that person is arrested on a new charge, which of course is not uncommon. About 70% of offenders reoffend and come back into jail. And so that's why you see the 33 number for the same person doing notifications on. So the net number is 96, or about 19% of all the requests that ICE tender to us for notification of release. That is approximately less than 0.5% of all of our bookings into MDF. Next slide, please. So just to give you some background, this gives demographic data for those 96 notifications that we did make to ICE officials. As you can see, Hispanic 72, Asian 18, Black 1, White 3, and others 2. And of course, the vast majority were males, 94 versus 2 females. Next slide, please. So this gives a sample of some of the types of qualifying offenses for which I feel an obligation as sheriff to notify ICE. My number one job is to keep Contra Costa families safe. And to the extent that we have an offender who has committed one of these serious crimes, who's subject to being released, they should appropriately be notified to ICE and referred to ICE, in my opinion. 71 miscellaneous felonies, 4 were for murder or attempted murder, 5 were for robberies, 2 for carjackings, 11 for assault with deadly weapons, 2 for rape, and 1 for stalking. And the notion that that these individuals who are not only here undocumented, but have committed these very serious offenses while here undocumented should not be referred, I think defeats notions, basic notions of public safety. And I won't go along with that. Next slide, please. There were many questions last year about whether we allow interviews. We would allow interviews if a proper notice and waiver were signed by the detainee. ICE has now shifted their policy. They don't really come in to do interviews in custody any longer. So we've had 0 requests in 2019 for any ICE to actually enter our facility and conduct an interview. And I don't believe that that's going to change anytime soon. Next slide, please. So lastly, I just wanted to give a brief update on COVID-19. First of all, I want to thank County Health and specifically Custody Health for doing a fantastic job of not only implementing protocols and procedures to keep staff and inmates safe, but for having a relatively low number of cases. So as of July 17th, we had 12 inmates tested positive for COVID-19. Since, I believe that's gone up by 1, so we're at 13. None of them are currently in custody. So they were booked, tested, quarantined, and either charges were not filed or they bailed or whatever the case might be, they're no longer in custody. We had 5 staff members test positive. Of those, 3 are back to work and 2 still remain in quarantine at this time. It's important to know as well that we have spread out our population, which typically can be well into the approaching the 18 to 1900 range. We're down around 700 to 800 now, which has afforded us an opportunity to move people into single cells. The vast majority of our housing now is 1 person, 1 cell, with a few exceptions, to help mitigate the potential for spread of COVID. Also, all new bookings into our facility, if they're not otherwise subject to release on a notice to appear, which we are very aggressive about, if it's a very serious violent felony or a homicide or what have you, and they're going to be held in our jail, we quarantine them automatically for 14 days. Health monitors them, gives them the COVID test. We've had very few rejections from booking inmates to take the test. Other sheriffs up and down the state have had different experiences. They've had large numbers who have refused to take tests. We haven't seen that here, fortunately. We provide face masks, of course, for all the detainees and all of our staff. All staff are checked when they come in to assume their responsibilities on duty. And whenever possible, we adhere to social distancing guidelines. So as we sit here today, we have 0 inmates, whether people subject to future ICE notification or not, who are in custody with a COVID diagnosis, fortunately. And again, thank you to County Health staff. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Sheriff Livingston. And I'm going to turn to our board members and ask if anyone has any questions for Sheriff Livingston. And we get rid of the PowerPoint there, and I'm not seeing any. So at this time, oh, John, I'm sorry, you popped up. Okay, yeah. John, go ahead. You've got a question for the sheriff.
Thanks to the sheriff and the Asian Law Caucus presenter. We appreciate the information. Sheriff, can you just wanted to get an understanding? I have two questions. One is on the chart that showed the 71 individuals on notification, it listed burglary, grand theft, and sale of narcotics. What's the breakdown of that? I'm just trying to get an understanding of what, how many were burglary, how many were narcotics, how many were grand theft. I'm trying to get how many of those were actually drug sales, because I would put the drug sales maybe in a different category than the others.
Yeah, we'd have to break out those numbers. We were trying to just give you the miscellaneous felony category and capture all the numbers in there. But to drill down, I would have to prepare that for you, which we could certainly do.
If you can provide that, that would be helpful. Let me raise the issue, and I know this has been raised before because it came up when I was on the Public Protection Committee a couple years ago, shortly after the passage of SB 54. A number of counties across the state, including Contra Costa, instituted the practice of posting the release dates publicly. And as you recall, there was a lot of concern about that, and a belief by many that that was a way to sort of notify ICE publicly. And again, Contra Costa wasn't the only county that did this. There were many counties that did it. And we heard from a number of the reentry providers that they believe that posting the dates publicly didn't really provide them any benefit, that letting them know, emailing them, as what was suggested in the other presentation, would be a sufficient way of letting those reentry providers know about the release and be able to assist those individuals instead of posting it to the world. It sounds like you're looking at a new system, so I would ask you to look at, is there any reason why you can't institute this email alternative as was suggested until your new system is put in place?
Sure. Well, just a couple of thoughts, Supervisor Joya. First, initially, when we began this process, there was not unanimity among service providers that it should not be provided. There were some that thought it was actually very helpful. And perhaps their position has now evolved where they want an email option instead. But this is for all people to access and see, including victims of crimes generally, that this person is subject to release on this date and this time. So obviously there's Marcy law ramifications. There's other ways to provide those notifications, of course, to victims under Marcy's law. But it was an attempt to be fair across the board. Here's all the releases. Whether ICE actually accesses those or not, I have no idea. They've never told me that they access them. I'm quite confident they have their own databases they can use. But nonetheless, this was brought to us during our series of meetings last year with the Asian Law Caucus, and we will look at that. We have a new vendor that will be coming in, but for COVID, we would have been farther down the road in implementing a new jail management system that will also do things like expand tablet access for inmates and more programming available on tablets, et cetera. That's been delayed, but once that system's in place with the new jail management, we could certainly look at a login type system where we track those instead. As far as emailing all the various providers, that list that we generate daily, I'm not sure I can commit just yet to doing that, particularly because of staff restrictions and some of the COVID challenges we're facing, but I can certainly look at it.
Yeah, I think the sooner we to move to a system where it's not publicly released. I mean, as you say, there are other ways to meet some of these other legal requirements, and I think there are some alternatives, to be than this mass posting to the world. And so it would be helpful for what the board can do to help move that along, to assist in moving to this new system, so that not just ICE, but the world is notified, and in many cases there's not a general public purpose to do that. And so I would ask that we consider how to move that along quicker.
Yeah, and I'll pledge to you to look at that, but I just want to, I think it's fair to make the point that the initial booking of every person by current California law is a public record. And we have vendors that come in that basically mine data to sell to criminal defense attorneys, and we're required to provide that to them. So anyone who wants to know who was booked, what their city of residence is, what their age is, what their offenses were as under booking, can get that now. This is separate, of course. This is now releases, but it's not like there's any secrets about who's in custody and who's not.
And finally, is there anything that the board can do to help move that transfer to this new system in which these names then wouldn't get publicly released?
Well, we'll be bringing the final contract to the board for approval. I'll have to check with county council when that might be, but the support of the board to move that forward obviously would be helpful. And I'll remind the board that the implications of that new contract on the ICE notification matter when it comes before you.
Thank you.
Well, and what I would also ask for, Sheriff, though, in response to, is ensuring that if we're going to move to not publicizing it on the internet for the whole world to see, that we ensure that any victims groups that would have an interest in receiving that information, family members who are trying to track the release of an individual. We have so many horror stories throughout the state, throughout the country, of people being released in the middle of the night, nowhere to go, family members not knowing that they're going to be released, themselves becoming victims of crime. I just want to make sure that before we just absolutely blanket say, we just want to make sure who else is accessing this information for otherwise very valid reasons that will in fact ease the reentry opportunities of an individual. So it's not, and again, I know there's this suspicion that ICE is just out there checking it every night and every morning and day. As you state, they very likely are accessing information other ways, but I just want to make sure. I'm always very, very concerned about the safety of the community, victims' rights, things of that nature. Understood. Okay, great. Any other questions for the sheriff at this time? Okay, thank you so much, Sheriff. And we are now going to move into the public comment portion of this. Oh, Diane, I'm so sorry. I did not see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Just to clarify, one of the questions that Ms. Kim asked was, who is eligible for notifications? Sheriff, do you want to address that?
So it is, as she mentioned also, it's fairly technical, but we follow the restrictions of Penal Code 1192.7, which essentially sets out all the prerequisite felony convictions. So served time in state prison in the last 15 years, convicted of a serious or violent felony, etc. Reoccurring misdemeanor offenses like DUI. There's a narrow band of carve-outs, and our staff is very careful about making sure that one of those exceptions applies before we comply with the request from ICE to do the notification. But I don't have a full slide on the details. It's fairly involved.
Okay, and I think she also was asking about what organizations are eligible for notifications of people being released. Do you have, is it just anybody that asks for it, or? I guess
I'm not sure. Well, as far as the criminal history?
Well, I think she was, I don't know if she's still on here. She was asking about the idea of emailing reentry organizations. And so based on your seeing your presentation, she had said she wanted to know.
Sure, I can explain that if it would be helpful. So in one of the meetings, in the meetings the Sheriff's Office had with CCIRA, the interim solution that we proposed is to email reentry organizations release dates if they wanted that information in the interim before that new system would launch.
follow?
Well, let's have the sheriff respond first, and then John.
I know I had a question of this of Asian Law Caucus.
Oh, Melanie? Okay.
Yeah. So I know this practice of posting online, as you pointed out, because I remember when it occurred. Federal Governor and I were on public protection at the time and had a lot of discussion about this, and we're actually concerned about the statewide practice because it seemed to be in the aftermath of SB 54. What have you seen in other counties? Just trends you're seeing, either those that continue to have this practice, or other ways they've achieved some of the goals of notifying reentry. Just what patterns have you seen?
Sure. So, for example, in Alameda County, there's a system in place so that you can input personal information to get someone's release date. So, if your concern is about victims, that is a way that they can still find out that information. And it's probably a more effective way than having to look at a list of release dates every morning.
Right.
Where if they have someone in mind that they want to know if they're going to be released, they can just put that personal information. And that's more efficient than going through release dates that are posted every day. So I think that better serves victims if that's a concern. And I can tell you that there are, counties have had to pay out because of liability for notifications and transfers, and that's happening in various counties and cities in California.
So, Sheriff, the system that you're looking at putting into place would then allow that type of search to look for a name and then find it, as opposed to it being posted. Is that how that works?
Well, right. So to answer your question and Supervisor Burgess's question, basically, we're looking for, I think what the Asian Law Caucus wants is an interim step, which would be email only until a new system could be implemented, which would do, John, what you're suggesting, which a person would log in, and then we'd have a record of that, and then they would conduct a search for the person that they're interested in. I'll rely on what my staff advises me as far as timing, and if that's something that we can do without too much adverse impact in custody operations, I have no objection to it in principle, but I do want to make sure we preserve the right for victims and to Supervisor Anderson's comments, that people can easily access this and know when someone's being released for a whole number of reasons, not, of course, just ICE. So, in fact, I think this very small percentage of those names are ICE related, as you can see from the numbers. So, we should have, hopefully, clarity on that system that would allow, is what you're suggesting, John, someone to log in, do a search, and get the information. As far as the timing, I'm just not sure yet.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, any other questions by board members? Federal, please go ahead. Supervisor Glover.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Sheriff, can you share, prior to us going into public comment, because I want to be able to equate the comments to some realities. What is the capacity of the facility?
To give you some specific numbers here.
Okay.
So the MDF is just under 700 and about 1,900 for the Richmond facility. I'm trying to see if I can give you booking numbers. Last year in 2019, we had at MDF and 21,965 go through that facility. And the average number was about 600 inmates there. And of course, these numbers have dropped significantly under COVID. And the average numbers at West County have been somewhere around the 800 range. So well below our capacity, and particularly with the zero bail that we had, we were below sufficiently to allow placement, as I mentioned earlier, of single cells.
And of those numbers, what is your average ICE detainee? What is that number?
So we don't have any ICE detainees, so we don't track it that way. So
Okay.
all we're doing, we would be holding that person subject to ICE's interest on a local criminal charge only. This is completely different than the contract we had 2 years ago where we did have designated ICE detainees. That is no longer occurring. So the only reason that we would have to interact with ICE is if they send us a notification for a detainee who has a criminal charge pending within Contra Costa County, whether it's a city or a county arrest.
So there's no isolation based on them being an ICE detainee?
That is correct.
And you wouldn't have any knowledge of that unless you were contacted by an ICE agency?
So yes, so ICE will notify us, oh, this person, we want to be notified when this person's released because they're of interest to us. Then my staff looks at the qualifying felonies. Does this person qualify under SB 54? If they do, then we'll do a notification that the person is about to be released, but that's the extent of it.
Okay, and relationship to COVID, would you will identify whether they were an ICE detainee or not?
No, not typically, because they're held with general population. They're all subject to the quarantine and the treatment and the medical services by county health, but there's no distinction there between an ICE detainee or not. And there are no ICE detainees specifically. They're there. They may be subject to ICE interest upon release, but they're there for a local pending criminal charge.
Okay, and once again, just in terms of whether they were an ICE detainee, you would have no knowledge of that unless you were contacted by the ICE agent.
Correct.
Just wanted that.
And just to be clear also, Supervisor Glover, the way ICE becomes aware of someone that's been booked into my facility or one of the 3,000 other counties in the United States is through fingerprinting systems. So when that person is fingerprinted as part of our normal booking, their fingerprints go to Cal DOJ, to federal DOJ, and that's where ICE piggybacks and says, oh, this is a person we're interested in. That's during that initial booking and fingerprinting.
Okay. But once again,
Okay.
you would still have no knowledge of that.
No.
Thank you. And once again, Sheriff, I'm just trying to also understand, not just in for this conversation, but ongoing conversation, is that the as we look at our facility, it's certainly not near capacity. And I guess I'm just trying to understand, in terms of the capacity that we're at the facility, when you give me that number, that's both Martinez and Richmond?
Yes, with all the facility now, with the number of releases we've done by bookings and also the fact that local agencies are not booking, although those numbers are creeping up. We were around 700, we're up to 800 plus. But remember, just by reference, we have 184 inmates facing murder charges right now. Those cases can go for years. High security inmates, 306. In other words, they have an enemy within the facility or they're at risk for the nature of their offenses, et cetera. So we have to manage those populations, protective custody inmates, mental health inmates, parole violations, et cetera, those that we're not able to transfer to state prison that have already been convicted of a serious or violent felony. So having the extra space at the moment has afforded us an opportunity to move people around, subject to very careful classification. So we're not putting two rival gang members in the same module, for example. But our numbers will undoubtedly increase back up. Plus, we have the whole other issue that we'll discuss at some other point about enhancing medical and mental health services to inmates through some consent decrees we're considering. So it's complicated.
Thank you. Candace, you're muted.
No, and I apologize. Thank you. We are, any further questions? We are going to then go into public comment. And I know we've got quite a few people on the line, and those individuals will have 1 minute if they're speaking in English. If someone is speaking with a translator, we will afford them 2 minutes. And Jamie, we will ask you and our operator to handle the incoming calls.
Tim Mule's going to go over just a little more information about how public comment will work.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tim.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we go into public comment. We are providing consecutive interpretation today of public comment. So we would ask folks who are providing public comment in Spanish to pause every 2 or 3 sentences to allow the interpreters to provide an English interpretation to your board and the rest of the listening audience. Also, we mentioned that we are providing a Spanish closed caption. Just a quick note on that. For folks who are watching the Spanish live stream right now on YouTube, Spanish closed captioning is not available on that service. However, if you are watching our CCTV stream at ContraCostaTV.org and you select CC3, you can view the Spanish closed captioning there if you require that. And with that, Madam Chair, we are ready to take public comment.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
You will have 1 minute to state your comment. Please, you will hear a beep when you have 15 seconds left. At that time, please start to wrap up your comment. Tendrá 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Indique su comentario un par de oraciones a la vez para permitir que se traduzca. Escuchará un pitido cuando faltan 15 segundos. En ese momento, por favor, termine su comentario. And with that, moving on to our first caller here. Okay, caller, you have 2 minutes to state your, caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Caller, perhaps your phone is on mute. Please unmute.
Hi, this is Tony with the Contra Costa Immigrant Rights Alliance. I'm calling because I'm just concerned that there's still a collaboration between the Sheriff's Department and ICE. There's no reason why people should be transferred, and hoping that in 2020, especially now during COVID, there will be no more further transfers or any sort of interaction with ICE. And it's troubling to hear that, I keep hearing the numbers going down between the jails, among the jails. And so, that's just telling us that we need to defund the Sheriff's Department. And I look forward to, our further conversations next week when we continue talking about defunding the Sheriff's Department. There's no reason why we need to be having people locked up during a pandemic when we're putting people's lives at risk.
Okay, moving on to our next question, comment, in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. Que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hi, my name is Shayla Bonner. I'm the program manager at the Safe Return Project. I'm calling today because incarceration is not an effective way to address or stop harm or violence in our communities. Therefore, money should be spent, with community solutions that have been proven to rehabilitate people, including mental health interventions that do not rely on law enforcement, job programs so that people have livable wages, stable housing, and youth programs. You all were talking earlier about not wanting to waste the county's money on a ballot measure, but you continue to waste county dollars on systems that clearly do not work for our community. They do not rehabilitate, and they cause more trauma in our communities. We need to invest in community-based mental health services and not incarceration. Furthermore, we demand the closure of Juvenile Hall and Marsh Creek. Also, having 1 minute to speak in public comment is not enough time to express our concerns because we have a lot more to say. And I will end with that. Thank you.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hello, my name is Megan Watson, and I'm a resident of Antioch. The recent Supreme Court decision in U.S. versus California leaves intact rules that prohibit law enforcement officials from aiding federal agents in taking custody of immigrants as they are released from jail. So why does the Contra Costa Sheriff's Department continue to collaborate with ICE? Livingston's comments suggest that he believes that undocumented immigrants who have committed crimes need to be deported in order to keep our community safe, but that is indirect, ineffective, and inhumane. People turn to crime because they are not being cared for, and as a community, we have failed these individuals. Contra Costa needs to step up and provide services to assist our most vulnerable community members. We demand that the county stops all collaboration with ICE and increases transparency around the sheriff's policies. We demand that the sheriff's department stop notifying ICE of release dates through direct communications, and we demand that the department stop publishing release dates online. I implore you to adopt CCIRA's recommendation.
I do apologize. That is 1 minute up. Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Caller, perhaps your phone is on mute. All right, moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hello, this is Madeline Stone again, resident of Martinez. I would again like to reiterate defunding of Sheriff Livingston's budget, as well as the defunding and closure of the juvenile youth detention facility, as well as the Marsh Creek facility, as was previously stated by the Safe Return Project. These are facilities that do, in fact, cause people to be re-institutionalized because of the trauma that they cause towards our community members and our family members. I would also like to reiterate, as many people have said so far, and I'm sure many more people after me will say, that Contra Costa County law enforcement and all agencies here should not collaborate with ICE in any way whatsoever. It further endangers and marginalizes the most at-risk and most vulnerable members of our community, both to the current pandemic and to other forms of social injustice. It is inhumane to collaborate with an agency that terrorizes community members, that imprisons and puts in cages children at our...
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on a timer. Moving on to our next comment in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hello, my name is Raquel Ortega, and I'm with the ACLU of Northern California. First, I'd like to thank the Board of Supervisors for fulfilling their legal obligation to host the Truth Act Forum. I wish that the forum this year were during the evening, as we've requested for the past 3 years, but here we are. I know that we all know that local law enforcement cooperating with ICE in any capacity has harmful effects on the community. But during this pandemic, cooperation with ICE has fatal consequences. ICE picking people up from Contra Costa jails not only affects the individuals themselves, but contributes to the community spread of COVID-19. By publishing release dates and encouraging ICE to pick people up, which is effectively a transfer, the sheriff is making a choice to spread the virus rather than allowing individuals to go home and shelter in place. In order to halt the unnecessary spread of COVID-19, we must stop these practices now. And for these reasons...
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Good morning. My name is Tomasa Espinosa, a longtime resident of Contra Costa County and a mother volunteer with the West County Regional Group, sponsored by First Five. One of the reasons I volunteer with the WCRG is because we value children and families in Contra Costa. We want our young children to grow up in equitable communities with all opportunities for optimal development. As a representative, I would like to ask you to put an end to the collaboration between the sheriff and the immigration department. 4 years ago, I wrote public comment asking you to invest in the community by rejecting the expansion of the jail and putting an end to the sheriff's collaboration with immigration. 4 years later, here we are. I keep asking for the same thing. Although the state has passed the Truth Act, Sheriff Livingston has found ways to continue collaborating with immigration. It is time for you to take action. I ask that you invest in our community. Invest in prevention and stop incarcerating our community. Put funding in health programs because they're greatly needed right now, especially due to the pandemic.
I do apologize. It is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Good morning. My name is Christine Clark, and I'm a proud member of East County Regional Group, sponsored by First Five. Thank you for having the Truth Act Forum. We do have three main requests of the Board of Supervisors and the Sheriff. First, that we do ask for an end to all collaboration with ICE in our county. Our Sheriff's Department should instead adopt CCIRA's recommendations to the Sheriff and Immigration Policy. ICE notifications greatly increase the likelihood that someone will be taken into ICE custody. This practice must end. This is causing separation and suffering of many children and their families in our county. We also ask for an investment in our Black and Brown communities. Please close Juvenile Hall and Marsh Creek Detention Facility and instead invest in community mental health services, youth programs, and the Oren Allen Youth Rehabilitation Facility. I was recently on the BOA community listening session on July 9th and heard so many great retired teachers talk about how they volunteer at Oren Allen and love working there with the youth. It's a peaceful environment where they can learn and thrive. We should be prioritizing education, not incarceration. Lastly, please do not allow the Sheriff's Department to use
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
My name is Linda Olvera. I live in Martinez, District 5. Working here with many local immigrants, organizations, and at the Richmond jail when it was holding the detainees. Where do you find the justification, heart and soul, for allowing your sheriff to turn over innocent immigrants to the inhumane jails of U.S. immigration, falsely known as detention centers, where our innocent immigrants are dying of the virus? May I remind you that we are a sanctuary county and a sanctuary state, but you have a sheriff that resents all of this as a strong Trump supporter and plays games in order to transfer innocent human beings to immigration jails and prisons for the sake of monetary profits and his own personal racism towards people of color. We are now witnessing in this county and this country the same actions of Hitler right before our eyes, and you are allowing this. I don't need to remind you of the great contribution of our backbreaking immigrants to this country for hundreds of years, including the essential workers that they are during this.
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Mi nombre es Patricia. Yo voy a traducir para Ana González. Ana, empiece, por favor.
My name is Patricia.
Ana González, soy miembro de ACE y vivo en Richmond, California. Estoy aquí para pedirle a los supervisores que los ayuden a que el Sherit no esté dando información de las personas detenidas a migración.
Espérese un segundo. I'm asking the sheriff not to give out information about the people who are detained in immigration.
Sean justos y honestos. Ayúdenos, ustedes tienen el poder de dejar libre a los jóvenes y adultos que tienen delitos menores.
You have the power to let go the young people and the adult population who have misdemeanors.
Dinero para las escuelas, hospitales y para el programa de salud mental.
And we need money for schools, for hospitals, and for health services and different kinds of programs of relating to mental health. And please release young people with misdemeanors.
We are not getting a translation. It sounds like it's coming through the board microphone, but it's hard for us and the Board of Supervisors to hear that.
Madam Chair, we've conferred in the board chamber, and we do have a fix for that. We have to unmute a speaker that's close here to the monitor. So perhaps we can invite the public speaker to provide her comment one more time. And if I just might remind folks, if you're speaking in Spanish, please pause every 2 or 3 sentences to allow the interpreters to provide the interpretation in English to the board.
And if we could ask the interpreters, if someone doesn't pause, because they may not understand our instructions in English, if you could please ask them to pause so you can pause and translate. And we would like to be able to hear it because the CCTV broadcast is delayed, so we are relying on the speakers right here for us to hear it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Going back to the caller. La persona que llama, por favor, da una pausa cada oraciones para que deje nuestro interpretación para que se traduzca.
Okay, so do you want me to translate what Ana said, Ana Gonzalez?
Yeah.
Okay, Ana Gonzalez, she lives in Richmond, and she was asking to the supervisors to please ask the chair to stop putting online information for the ICE. That way, you don't want to have any kind of communication with ICE. And also that to invest in schools and libraries and youth programs for the community that is more important, and for mental health. And also to stop any incarceration or increase more incarceration for people that have minor crimes. So that's basically what she said. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your question. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Por favor, da una pausa después de cada oración.
Hello, my name is Elsie Mills. I live in Concord. I demand that the county stop all collaboration with ICE and transparency around the sheriff's policies. Stop notifying ICE of release dates through communications with ICE and publishing release dates online. I demand a divestment from incarceration, close the juvenile hall in Marsh Creek, and invest in community-based mental health services and youth programs in the Orrin Allen Youth Rehabilitation Facility. I demand that AB 109 funds be used to assist people with reentry, not to assist the sheriff with criminalization. Thank you.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Por favor, deja segundos para que se traduzca.
Hi, my name is Nicole Zapata, and I'm a community organizer with eBase in Concord. I was also born and raised in Contra Costa. The sheriff's comment today stating that not only are these people here undocumented says all that we need to know about where he stands, about how he views immigrants in this county. Regardless of a community member's convictions, they are still people who should be given the proper resources to thrive and should not be sent over to ICE. This could easily be a death sentence, especially during this pandemic, disproportionately affecting Black and Brown communities. We demand that the sheriff stop notifying ICE of release dates and also stop giving us excuses for not doing so. The county must defund the sheriff and invest in community-based services, and AB 109 funds must be used to support communities of color who are impacted by incarceration, not for helping the sheriff criminalize Black and Brown people. Contra Costa already gives over $15 million of these funds to law enforcement. I also want to note that this is not a true public forum as required by the Truth Act. By starting the forum at 9:30 I
do apologize. That is 1 minute on a timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Después de cada par de oraciones, por favor, deja couple segundos para que se traduzca.
Yeah, so this is Melvin Willis again. Look, we should not be sharing people's release dates to ICE because I don't really recall that we're actually doing that with every inmate that gets released. And part of, going to jail and prison is to supposedly rehabilitate people. So if we're releasing people, why are we going after folks that we are supposedly rehabilitating? There is a narrative and a consciousness in this county that truly believes that if somebody is undocumented, that they don't belong here. In addition to that, there's also a narrative in this county that we are sitting on stolen land, and once upon a time, California used to be Mexico. So there's a lot of double standards in terms of philosophy going around here, or just mixed messages. We do not need to continue to fund an operation that is targeting families. We need deeper investment into other social services, and we need to cut from the sheriff's budget, close juvenile hall, and stop sharing information to ICE. It's immoral and inhumane. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pausa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Hi, my name is Sandhya Natador, and I work at the California Immigrant Policy Center. CIPC is a member of CCIRA, and along with our partners here today, we have significant concerns with Sheriff Livingston and his department's continued collaboration with ICE. As my colleagues have uplifted today, the Contra Costa Sheriff's Department maintains a policy of notifying ICE of release dates for people who are eligible for release from county custody, as well as publishing those release dates online. The recent Supreme Court decision in USA v. California, however, leaves intact the Ninth Circuit Court decision that local officials have no duty to help immigration agents enforce federal law. Let me be clear, this means that in the midst of a pandemic, Sheriff Livingston and his department are voluntarily cooperating with ICE. In light of this, we demand that the county stop all collaboration with ICE. This means, 1, stop notifying ICE of release dates through communications with ICE and publishing those release dates online. 2, adopt Contra Costa Immigrants' Rights Alliance's recommendations to Sheriff's immigrant policy. And 3, provide the current version of the Sheriff's immigrant policy to the community, including the office's policy.
I do apologize. It is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pausa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Donald Lang. I am a resident in Pittsburgh, California. I'm also a member of ACE. And I fully support defunding the sheriffs because especially if he's in collaboration with ICE, that puts, people in Black and brown communities in more danger than we already are, especially in the event of COVID-19. And also defunding the Youth Detention Center in Marsh Creek and start investing in community outreach and community-based funding, so that way that we can have a better, safer community, especially for communities that have already been marginalized enough. Thank you.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Blanca Colín y estoy pidiendo por traducción en español, por favor, en inglés, por favor.
Yes, my name is Blanca, and I'm asking for translation into English, please. Siga, señora.
Ok, sigue, por favor.
Ok. Mi nombre es Blanca Colín, residente de Contra Costa, madre, abuela y vicepresidente del Grupo Regional del Centro del Condado, patrocinado por los primeros 5.
Espérese un segundo. I am Blanca. I'm a mother, a grandmother, and I'm a resident of the county. And siga, por favor.
Nosotros trabajamos para crear comunidades más saludables, seguras y equitativas para los niños y sus familias.
We are working together to create healthier communities, safe communities for the families and the children.
Estoy aquí muy asombrada e indignada al saber que nuestro departamento del Sherit sigue colaborando con el Departamento de Inmigración.
I am angry and astonished that the Sheriff's Department continues to cooperate with immigration.
En especial por la situación que todas las familias estamos viviendo con esta situación de COVID-19.
Especially since families are living a very difficult situation with COVID-19.
Muchos hemos perdido nuestro trabajo y no podemos pagar la renta.
You know, many of us have lost our jobs and we cannot pay rent.
Necesitamos invertir en servicios y programas y no seguir invirtiendo en el encarcelamiento de nuestras comunidades inmigrantes.
We need to invest in services and programs, and we have to stop investing in the sheriff and situation that is hurting our immigrant communities.
Inviertan ese dinero en servicios de prevención como de salud mental y médica, programas para niños pequeños y adolescentes, para capacitar y encontrar empleo.
And we need to spend money in prevention and people with health problems, mental health problems, and also to help people who need to find work and employment and schooling.
Les pido que no.
Perdón, pero esos son 2 minutos. We're on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pasa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Yes, my name is Jaime Catter. I'm an ACE member, and I just want to say that I hope that the Board of Supervisors does not increase the budget for the sheriff, and also the juvenile hall and the Center for Youth and Marsh Creek should be closed down. We need funding for mental health services. I understand that the Richmond area does not have a hospital that most people can go to. So these are the services that really need funding. The mental health programs like NAMI, there's an office in Concord. I believe they have a center in Richmond. Thank you very much.
Okay, moving to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pasa después de un par de oraciones que se puede, para que se pueda traducir.
Hello?
Yes.
As a tax-paying member of Contra Costa County and a law-abiding citizen, I am in favor of anyone, legal or illegal, in the country to be turned over to ICE, deported, or convicted of their crimes. And I do not support the defunding of the police or the sheriff, and I do support the communication between ICE and the sheriff in the cases for illegals that are committing crimes that are dangerous, and I do appreciate the protection of the police and the sheriff. And if people are following the law, they have nothing to worry about as far as being deported or anything else. So those are my feelings. Thank you.
All right, moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pasa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Yes, hi, this is Ali Saidi from the Contra Costa Immigrant Rights Alliance. I want to first address the public comment being limited to 60 seconds. The whole point of a Truth Act forum is that it is a community forum and that it is not just a one-way communication from the sheriff and the Board of Supervisors to the community, but it is meant for the Board of Supervisors to receive and consider public comment. And it seems that every time that issues of immigrant rights and racial justice and the uprising right now that is calling for the recognition that Black Lives Matter, every time that that gets more and more present for the Board of Supervisors, they reduce the amount of time for community input. And that is bad public service in my view. I would say that we need to end ICE collaboration that the sheriff has been conducting for years. His budget is about $250 million. That's right, $255 million. And we need to close Marsh Creek Detention Facility, take that $5.8 million.
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pasa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Hi, good morning. This is Christy Laughlin with eBase, and I had other comments prepared, but also as I listened to the community members get cut off mid-sentence, I need to register also concerned that this format today doesn't truly honor the spirit or mandate of the Truth Act. The law states that there needs to be at least one public community forum, and this is really not a forum. It's no exchange of ideas, not a dialogue. The format does not do right by community members seeking real meaningful engagement with the sheriff or even with you, the Board of Supervisors. Reducing public comments to 60 seconds is a very alarming trend, which definitely does not constitute a community forum and, in fact, feels tokenistic. The issues of collaboration with ICE is a matter of life and death. Does not the life and death practices of this county merit real and more robust debate in this county? Can the board actually facilitate a true community forum where we can ask the sheriff directly some questions and their...
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pausa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
¿Aló? ¿Sí? ¿Sí me puede oír?
Can you hear me?
Sí. Ok, mi nombre es Raúl Vázquez.
My name is Raúl Vázquez.
Estamos demandando que paren la colaboración del condado de ICE. Del condado de ICE. Demandamos que pare todas las colaboraciones del condado con ICE y transparencia de la policía del Sherit.
We are demanding that any collaboration between ICE and the sheriff be stopped, and we want transparency from the sheriff.
Parar de dar notificaciones a la migra o ICE. Publicación, días de liberación en línea con ICE.
And please do not release information on ICE online, please. Please stop that.
Adoptar CCIRAs y recomendaciones para el Sherit en las recomendaciones para la política actual y parar de hacer traslados inmigrantes.
Please adopt the recommendations for the present current policies and stop moving immigrants out and send them to ICE.
No más fondos para la encarcelación, cerrar el local de detención juvenil.
And please
invertir en las comunidades.
Close down the juvenile hall.
Demando no más invertir en las encarcelaciones y cerrar la juvenil local de detención Marcia Creek.
And we're demanding no more funding of the police and also to close down the installation of the juvenile hall in Marcia Creek.
Invertir en la salud mental básica de servicios a la comunidad. Programas para la juventud y invertir en el centro de rehabilitación Orin Allen.
And we demand health services, mental health services for the community and for the young people at the Health Allen Center.
Okay, and I do apologize, that is 2 minutes.
Lo siento mucho, pero ya son 2 minutos.
Caller, we have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hi, this is Cheryl Betty, and I just want to say, just last week and again in another week, we will be looking at budget requests, which will allege that we have stressed resources, yet this continued use of limited local resources contradicts this narrative and undermines the whole meaning of community policing strategies and drains local resources, and it lacks the required transparency and accountability that AB 2792 mandates. Also, that only providing 60 seconds to speak in the middle of a workday morning, we understand that you only are intending to fulfill the statutory requirement per AB 2792. But please don't insult us with this farce of a so-called forum. If you're not going to do it, then don't do it. Pretend that you're meeting the true spirit of the Truth Act is not happening. At least try and meet the spirit of the community. Thank you very much.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Yeah, this is Alex Zobel, Small Business Center in Richmond, also a volunteer faculty member inside San Quentin. The 1 minute comment is definitely a bad look. Moving on, I'm hearing from Sheriff Livingston a willingness to hand over his data vision of public safety to ICE, an agency that he's plainly and explicitly and openly collaborating with. Obviously, this needs to stop, and it sounds like the board needs to intervene to make him stop. I more importantly think that we need to be investing in data-driven approaches to public safety, violence prevention, and rehabilitation. Please explore some of the research around public safety and violence prevention. It's very clear that incarceration, criminalization, only beget more violence and more criminalization and more incarceration. We need to be investing in social services. As you consider the budget, I hope that you will make the majority of cuts from the Sheriff's Department and continue investing in social services, which is the best way to guarantee public safety. Thank you.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Wally. I'm a white parent, homeowner, and resident of Walnut Creek. I'm calling on the Board of Supervisors and the Sheriff to end all collaboration with ICE. Excuse me, my child is calling for my attention. Collaboration with ICE. Regardless of a conviction, all community members are valued and should not be funneled to ICE. Collaborating with ICE erodes community trust in law enforcement, willingness to reach out to law enforcement for public safety needs, while harming communities of color, immigrant community members, and our community at large, including myself. Please take this money that has been funding the sheriff for incarceration and ICE activities and instead invest in Black and Brown communities, prioritizing education, health care, mental health care, diversion programs, youth programs, the Orrin Allen Ranch, and affordable housing over criminalization. In addition, I ask that you please stop publishing release dates. I do appreciate the chance to be able to speak in this forum in this manner. However, I feel as though this is not a true forum where we can actually discuss ideas with people who might have different viewpoints than our own. And I really would appreciate the chance for us to have a true forum. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day, everyone.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hello, my name is Karen Hernandez. I am a resident of the city of Concord in Contra Costa County, and I am calling today to ask you to defund the Sheriff's Department. During the struggling and uncertain time of the pandemic, now is the time to rethink where our funding is going towards, and if it is actually being used to serve all community members. And from what I got from the sheriff's own presentation, is that just the idea of being undocumented to him is unlawful in his eyes, which shows his biased thinking towards our immigrant community. With no necessary need, he voluntarily shares public information that is most likely aiding ICE officials, whether he wants to see it or not. This action does not only put his department at risk, but our whole county for being liable to fines. It is time to stop protecting the sheriff's abusive, careless behavior towards the community he claims to supposedly protect. So again, I ask you all to continue to move this county into the just direction and defund the sheriff and hold him accountable. I also ask you to hold a real Truth Act forum and give people more time to talk.
I apologize, that is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
This is Bill, a resident of Contra Costa County, and I would like to commend the Sheriff's Department for following the laws to protect the law-abiding and tax-paying citizens and law-abiding immigrant community of Contra Costa County. I've heard the sheriff today speak about working to keep criminals off the streets of Contra Costa County, and I appreciate that. I do not support ending ICE collaboration. I do not support defunding the Sheriff's Department or Juvenile Hall. Also, I've heard comments as to the sheriff and Sheriff's Department spreading to COVID in this particular situation. I would like to see or have data that would support those claims. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to say your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
My name is Karen Perkins. I live in Walnut Creek. As Federal Glover pointed out, the jails are not near capacity. So why is our taxpayer money being used to fund a new jail? And then he assured us, oh, it's going up. The numbers are going up. Well, yes, if you build them, they will fill them. Also, end all collaboration of the Sheriff's Department with ICE. Make cuts to the Sheriff's Department, defund the sheriffs. It's the same thing. Close Juvenile Hall, Marsh Creek. Keep Oronell and Byron Boys Ranch open. And if 18 people have COVID, and that's including the workers there, that's not a small number when you're in an indoor closed facility. And it's possibly even an undercount. So if you value life and you value immigrants, which most of America is, whether they came here documented or undocumented, most of us, and our California economy would crash, as it already is practically doing, if we did not have immigrants, whether they...
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to say your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hello, board. My name is Tamisha Walker. I am an Antioch resident, a co-founder and executive director of Safe Return Project. My heart is heavy as I listen to the comments today. What people are asking you to do is equitable, reasonable, and moral. I would like to say that no child is illegal, no human being is illegal. This county should be safe for all residents, whether documented or undocumented. Everyone wants us to think differently about public safety. How do we do public safety right? We don't continue to put young people in cages. We don't continue to take money from the community, from that could go to valuable resources for mental health, substance dependency issues, and healthcare issues in our community. Continuing to give the sheriff funds that could be used in a community just is a slap in the face of residents who could use it right now, especially during this time.
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to say your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Caller, perhaps your phone is on mute.
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Hector Malvido. I'm with Ensuring Opportunity in Contra Costa, and we stand with the Contra Costa Immigrant Rights Alliance demand to end the county's collaboration with ICE, defund incarceration, close Juvenile Hall and Marsh Creek, and invest in Black communities, as well as demand that AB 109 funds are used to assist people with reentry and not criminalization. Any collaboration with ICE is known as a rogue agency. They actively break the law. Any sort of respect for the law that the sheriff purports to having is unfounded as this agency breaks the law to criminalize and deport unjustly people who are living in our communities, who are as deserving as anybody else and contribute to our communities and are part of the most important piece of why our nation is so great, our diversity. And we stand with Contra Costa Immigrant Rights.
I do apologize. It is 1 minute on the timer. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Hello, my name is David Sharples with the community group ACE. I'm calling on you to stop all collaboration with ICE and to divest out of incarceration, to close Juvenile Hall and Marsh Creek, and invest in community-based mental health services and youth programs at the Oronell and Youth Rehabilitation Facility. Thank you.
Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Sí, mi nombre es María Franco.
Yes, my name is Maria Franco,
Madre y presidenta del Grupo Regional del Oeste.
and the president of the Western Regional Group. Por favor, haga pausas para poder interpretarle. Please pause. Siga. Siga, por favor.
Presidenta del Condado Regional del Oeste.
President of the Western Regional Group. Siga.
Como madre de familia y comunidad, defiendo ambientes sanos, seguros y equitativos para nuestros niños y familias.
We favor equitable and good, healthy programs for our children and for a good environment for the community.
Especialmente en estos tiempos de pandemia, cuando debemos de tener tolerancia para todos.
Especially in this era of the pandemic, when we should show tolerance for everyone.
La pandemia está afectando desproporcionadamente a nuestra comunidad inmigrante.
The pandemic is affecting disproportionately our immigrant community.
Familiares y amigos están sufriendo los estragos.
Friends and families are suffering the consequences.
Es por eso que pido un alto a que dejen de dar dinero al Sherit y lo pongan.
That's why I asked to stop funding the sheriff and instead
en servicios y programas para ayudar a nuestros niños, la comunidad.
to turn those funds for purposes of helping our children and to help the community as well.
Parando el alto de trabajar con inmigración.
And making a final stop in terms of working with the folks at immigration.
Por bienestar de toda nuestra comunidad en este tiempo de pandemia.
For the well-being of our entire community in this pandemic era.
I do apologize, that is 2 minutes.
Disculpe, pero ya se pasaron los 2 minutos.
We'll to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pausa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Karen. I'm a resident of Contra Costa County. I just want to voice my support for the Sheriff's Department and for the laws of our country and of our county. And I encourage anyone who wants to change legislation to do that themselves and work in that direction. But I feel like this is not a place for us to defund people who are trying to enforce laws that have been put in place to protect us. I fully support the Sheriff's Department coordinating with ICE, and I'm concerned that there are so many people in our area that feel like they have to go against the law in order to protect people. The law is there to protect people and to protect citizens like us. Thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pasa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Hello, is that me? I don't know.
Yes, that is you.
Okay. Well, my name is Deborah Thompson, and I've been in Contra Costa County since 1973. So I'm going to do this fast because I need to get it all in. I have some questions. Is the person about whom we're speaking in the United States illegally, which is a felony? Yes. Has the person committed a crime, meaning that person has broken the law in California? Otherwise, that person would not be arrested. Yes. Has the person exhausted all legal options to remain in the country? Yes. Has the federal court ordered the person to be deported? Yes. If the person has not broken a California law, would that person have been arrested? The answer is no. Of the 129 people who were identified as having committed crimes where they would need to be, where ICE would have an option to receive them, 33 are repeat offenders. So that means not the federal law, but more than once that person, while an order is there for deportation, has broken the California law. And as far as being separated from families, all criminals who go to jail or prison, regardless of immigration status, are separated from their families. And so why should people in our country legally be treated differently? If you don't want to be separated from your family, then you should obey the law.
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the time, and we currently have no callers in queue.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our public comments. I'm going to turn it back. I know we've already had some board discussions with the sheriff, and John has expressed some concerns with regard to the notification, and the sheriff responded with the fact that they are working on alternative systems that should be coming back to the board. Are there any other comments by board members with regard to our Truth Act Forum at this time? Karen, please go ahead.
Different here today. Thank you. And I do want to thank both the Asian immigrant law practice and the sheriff for their presentation. I looked over both their PowerPoints last night and appreciated the information. I share a number of the callers' comments who believe that those individuals who have been incarcerated, whether they have served their sentences or not, under the Truth Act, it is allowed that their names be shared with ICE. I also saw or heard the sheriff say that that ICE does look at records for individuals. I don't believe these are individuals that go back to the community and take back up their life and move forward without the possibility of additional criminal activity. I know there are a number of individuals who are listening who do not agree with me, and that is fine. I respect your opinion, and I ask you to respect my opinion. As the sheriff mentioned, and I'm looking back here, one individual, notifications on the same individual was 33 out of the 129, which brought it down to 96. That tells me that even though that's just one person, that they go back to the community and commit crime. And, you know, I want a balance. I'm a second-generation immigrant myself on my father's side, and I understand and value immigration and immigrants. I support DACA. I support everything that leads to citizenship. But for those individuals who are committing crimes in our community and continue to commit crimes in our community, I have no sympathy or tolerance. I'm sorry if they are separated from their families. You know, there's a variety of reasons, and I have no problem trying to find additional resources to put into the community so that we can address crimes of poverty and lack of educational resources so that we can, to whatever extent, stop that tide. But there are individuals out there now who are violent criminals, and I don't believe anybody, and even those who spoke about not having interaction with ICE, would have a problem with further negative repercussions happening because of the crimes they've committed against other citizens and non-citizens. I don't care who they committed the crime against. If they committed against a person, that person and or their family has suffered. And so I support the sheriff. I want to continue working on all of the things that this board has been talking about racial equity and social justice. I do want to share, and this isn't, the Truth Forum is meant to be an opportunity to have a conversation back and forth about interactions by county departments with ICE. And I recognize we had a number of speakers today who spoke about defunding the sheriff and the budget. Thank you again for your comments. You're probably going to share those with us next week. But that has nothing to do with the interactions of ICE and reforming different practices. So, and the other side to this is obviously we are in a time of COVID, and we are trying to allow for as much interaction as possible without sharing any kind of virus with anyone. So that is why we had to do it by phone. I wasn't involved in the decision to have it early this morning, and I wasn't involved in the decision to limit public comment to just 1 minute. But other than that, those are my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and I do want to just point out With regard to the timing, this was selected as an alternative time. The last two forums have been held at 1 p.m. and at 2 p.m. During the workday, and certainly next year's chair, which presumably will be Supervisor Burgess, can make a determination, a recommendation as to the timing of the Truth Forum. And I do want to say that I did meet with CCIRA last week, and we did bring in the presentation because we felt it was important to have that balance. The 1 minute timing, yeah, it's not a lot, and it's what we've been doing at our last two board meetings for all board comments, only because we're trying to give everyone an opportunity to speak, and we have such full agendas. But anyway, John, please go ahead.
Yeah, so let me talk about process first. I do agree that I think this shortened time period of 1 minute shouldn't become our practice. In fact, look at today. We've gotten through this. We still have a couple of items. We're not going the whole day. We could have had everybody have 2 minutes, and we've had board meetings that go through the day, and the next two items we may be done in a couple of hours. So I want us to ask to revisit that issue of 1 minute. I don't, given the number of people even that spoke today, I don't think there was a reason that we needed to limit to cut the time 50%. We just started this practice over the last couple, month or so, whatever it is, month or two, and I'd like us to revisit that issue for the full 2 minutes and not shortened. Second, I did get a notice that some folks are still saying that they're on the line and haven't been called. So I don't know, we need to continue to give instructions to people on the phone, because there are folks who are saying they haven't been called. So I don't know.
Okay, well, if someone is still waiting to speak, I'm very happy to have them still speak. And so, Jamie, if the operator can see if anyone else, they would need to hit #2 to raise their hand if there's someone there to speak.
I spoke with the operator, and he said that there were a couple people who were rejoining the queue that had already spoken, but if there are new callers on the line that have not spoken under this item, they can press #2 and we will call on them.
And then I'll get back to my comment.
It looks like there are a couple callers that we haven't had on the line yet.
Okay, please bring them forward.
Okay. Our first caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario.
Thank you. My name is Deborah Ballinger. I'm a resident of Concord and a founding member of CCIRA and the executive director of Monument Impact. This is not the first time I haven't been called, but I'm really deeply saddened that the Truth Act Forum has become a perfunctory platform for the sheriff and the board to meet the most minimal requirements of the Truth Act, but not to really hear public comment. Is the county actually endorsing the sheriff's collaboration with ICE? I think that question has to be answered. The sheriff's public disdain for undocumented residents was seen in his presentation and his ongoing collaboration with ICE. Therefore, we really demand that the county stop all collaboration with ICE. For nearly 2 years, we requested that the sheriff stop notifying ICE of release dates and publishing them online. The alternatives have been discussed here today and in CCIRA meetings with the sheriff's department. So why is it taking so long to actually implement a moral alternative? We ask that you instead make an investment in Black and brown communities and youth. Commit to it.
I do apologize. That is 1 minute on the timer. Moving on to our next caller in queue. Caller, you have 1 minute to state your comment. La persona que llama tiene 2 minutos para expresar su comentario. Pasa después de un par de oraciones para que se pueda traducir.
Hello, my name is Rose Barretto. I live in an unincorporated area of Walnut Creek, and my concern is with the Sheriff's Department's lack of timely communication with the Immigrants' Rights Alliance. Has he provided them written response to their recommendations to the Sheriff's immigrant policy, or has he confirmed in writing any changes in practice that were mentioned at last year's Truth Act Forum? I would like the supervisors to ask the Sheriff to explain how current language in their policy is actually implemented, such as what counts as having reasonable suspicion of an immigration violation, or what counts as suspicion that an immigrant status is reasonably relevant, and what defines a transfer. For example, if a sheriff's deputy escorts a person being released to a public lobby and there is an ICE officer there, does this count as a transfer or not? There are many additional questions I think the supervisors could be asking on the community's behalf. And quick.
I do apologize. That is 1 minute, the timer. I currently have no callers in queue.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And John, I know you were in the middle of your comments when I broke.
Yes, I do want us to resolve this issue. I think I'm really concerned that we're letting this 50% reduction in speaker time. We're saying it's for efficiency. Democracy is not efficient. And even today, we've had longer Truth Act forum hearings at 2 minutes than, frankly, than the hearing that occurred today. So I think we can't just use the excuse of efficiency, because we're only at 12 o'clock. We're done. And
okay, and so
anyway, my suggestion is we take this up, and we shouldn't be at 2 minutes. In fact, the other issue on the budget hearing next week, we could have held our budget hearing over 2 days. We're holding it in 1 day, and a result of holding it in 1 day, we're cutting people's comments from 2 minutes to 1 minute. So I think there's a balance here that we need to really think about. So I want to put that out there, and you know, to be clear about that.
Well, and we can discuss that, and I'm going to turn to County Council, and it's a procedural matter. Right now, you're absolutely right, John. Our budget hearing is scheduled for 1 day. We do have 1 minute of public comment. If a majority of the Board of Supervisors wishes to change it to 2 minutes, you know, I'm a firm believer that you can get said what needs to be said in 1 minute. And certainly today, the public comment, I received multiple identical public comments, which were very much the same as the public comment we received too. And I think public comment is important, but I'm very fine keeping with 1 minute next week for the budget hearing. But if there are two other supervisors who would like to go to 2 minutes, I'm happy to do that. I've reserved the following day, Wednesday, if we need to continue our budget hearings, and I'm very open to that. I'm of the opinion you can say what you need to.
And the same today. I'm just saying that today it's 12:15, and I know we have a couple of other items. This hasn't been an unduly long board meeting. I'm just saying.
It's not over yet.
Well,
we've got a lot left.
We're here. We're available all day. I think we can sit through 2 minutes of public comment. A minute is not long enough. So
okay.
Everybody's basically getting cut off, except for one elected official at the beginning. So okay.
In the future, we will take that. Obviously, next year's Truth Forum, presumably it will be Diane, because she's vice chair now. She will certainly take that into consideration.
Okay. And I'm not just talking about the forum. I'm just saying, in general, at our meetings, we should think about this, the cutting to 1 minute.
Okay, well, I'm going to right now, because I don't want to have this discussion next week, I'm going to turn to each of the supervisors. Federal, for next week's budget hearing, would you like to change it to 2 minutes, or are you fine with the 1 minute we are planning on? If you can't unmute yourself, you can't vote on it.
Excuse me,
okay,
Madam Chair.
Federal, are you able to?
Madam Chair, we don't have an agenda item around changing the period for public comment on the budget. That would be a decision for the chair to be made for the next meeting. You could have an item on the next agenda at the beginning concerning time, but that wouldn't allow for publicity of that time period. But you could, at the next meeting, even if it's publicized for 1 minute, have an item allowing the board to move it to 2.
Okay, well, we can certainly postpone it to next week if that's more appropriate because it's not on today's agenda. However, I think as people prepare their remarks, it would be helpful for me to have this feedback because it's coming up in our current agenda in the context of the Truth Forum and public comments. I don't think we're too far afield from a Brown Act standpoint. So I'm going to settle. Go ahead.
So excuse me, and I know that it's not publicized for today's agenda, but just to stress that I think that we're living in a very different time in which our constituency at large is looking to participate in the process, and I totally agree with that. And so I think that we need to, because of the times in which we're living, give more opportunity for public comment. So I'm just going to say the 2 minutes I think we need to have that for our budget hearing.
Okay, and Supervisor Mitchell.
Well, and again, I think people will recall when we first were talking about the budget, I was a strong proponent for as much transparency as possible. So I think our chair gets the issue and our concern, and as she puts the agenda together for next week, I think she's heard us that we want a longer time.
Okay, and Diane, I'm assuming you're also in agreement with that?
Yeah, I just want to say that I want to make it clear that I don't think there's any intentions to take away from other people's time as much as it was to accommodate more people that we expected. And so I just want to make sure that's clear. And I am supportive of 2 minutes. I think that giving people that extra amount of time is important. These are extraordinary times. And I just want to basically repeat myself. There's no intention to take away people's ability to communicate with us. We're trying to accommodate as many people as possible. And if the comments for next week, having 2 minutes makes us have to go into a meeting the next day, I'm willing to do that.
Okay, great, thank you. So certainly, I think I've heard that message, and I think we will accommodate that. I don't think it's necessary to have an agendized item. We can act accordingly, and I think Diane articulated very well that today, as part of the Truth Forum, there was certainly no intent whatsoever to quell public speaking, public comment. This is obviously a very important topic. However, because we've been doing it the last few meetings, and we have had a lot of public comment, after meeting with the county administrator, he and I both felt it was appropriate to leave it to 1 minute, and we'll just see how long our meeting goes next week as well. Okay, other comments with regard to the Truth Forum. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, sorry, just one last comment. So I do want to reiterate my earlier point that we end the posting of names of the release dates. I want to remind all of us that this practice did not exist prior to 2018. It was put into effect here in February of 2018, along with about the same time that a number of counties around the state did the same thing. It was also the year that the SB 54 became effective. And now, when Orange County, this was all done around the same time. When Orange County did this, it actually made a statement that got reported in the newspaper that it was done to enhance communication with ICE.
But you've got to admit, John, in our county, it was in large part with our AB 109, our providers, our reentry programs. They were pushing for it at that time, and it was not a direct response in any way to ICE or a way to circumvent the state law, as opposed to, the state sanctuary law, which, we are not technically a sanctuary county in Contra Costa County. That wasn't the intent. It was really to help our CBOs, our providers who were complaining that they did not know when people were leaving.
That statement was made in Contra Costa, and at the public protection meeting, most of the main folks who do that work, in fact, who get AB 109 funds, came to our public protection meeting in 2018 and said, we haven't asked for this. We don't need it. This doesn't really add value. I'm just saying this is what they testified to Federal and I at Public Protection Committee meetings in 2018. These are the providers that actually get funding from AB 109. So I believe, I'm not saying anything's intentional. I'm just saying, but as a practice, we should look at having that end as quickly as possible, and obviously a change to the new system the sheriff described sounds like that would be a good thing and would still allow folks to look up individual names. It sounds like and I want to understand more about that, how that system works. But again, I think it was just, is it coincidental or not that a bunch of counties around California all put this practice into effect about a month or two after SB 54 went into effect? I'm just saying the result of that, however, has been, as Orange County called it, enhanced communication with ICE. So whatever the reasons were in Contra Costa, which may be different, the issue still is that in fact a member of the First Amendment Coalition in this news story said it was a way around SB 54 and seemed to be a pattern around the state. So I would ask us to look at having that in, and I think the sheriff sounds like he is looking at taking steps with regard to the new system. I would just ask that we consider, is there something that could be done in the interim, whether it's the email or another suggestion that was made by the Asian Law Caucus. So thank you for allowing me to make those comments.
Okay, got that. I think the sheriff heard that as well. And any other comments by board members? Okay, at this time, we are going to, I think we're at 12:25. Oh, Federal, go ahead. There you go. Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to echo those comments of John, because I think that in terms of Orange County, those were not the actual sentiments of Contra Costa and the viewpoints of Orange County. But I think that we do need to move swiftly in terms of an email type system. I think that would be appropriate and moving forward in that direction. And those are just comments directed to the sheriff, because I think that he has the right idea of putting in place a better system. So I just
great. Okay, any other comments? I think, Diane, do you have anything else you want to add? I know Karen may. Okay,